I was standing at the edge of the bluff behind my cottage, watching the last ferry cross the channel toward Tobermory, when my nephew's girlfriend appeared beside me and said in a voice barely above a whisper, "Don't sign the operating agreement." Page 22. The Death Benefit Clause. It's been rewritten since you last reviewed it. The wind off Georgian Bay carried her words away almost before I heard them. $27 million had landed in my account 6 days earlier. The sale of my medical software company to a health tech conglomerate out of Vancouver had closed after 14 months of back and forth with their lawyers, their accountants, and a parade of consultants who kept finding new reasons to delay. I had built that company from a rented office above a hardware store in Collingwood 21 years ago. Coded the first prototype myself, working nights after my day job at the hospital, testing it on weekends with nurses who thought I was crazy. Helen, my wife, had believed in it before anyone else. She used to bring me coffee at 2 in the morning, read over my shoulder, ask questions that made me rethink everything. She died 3 years before the sale closed. Pancreatic cancer. 8 weeks from diagnosis to funeral. She never saw the money, never got to know that the thing we had sacrificed vacations and date nights and sleep for had actually turned into something real. That hollow feeling never quite went away. But I told myself she would have wanted me to do something good with it, to take care of the people she loved, which is why I had invited everyone up to the cottage for Thanksgiving weekend. My younger brother Peter had died in a logging accident near Kapuskasing when his son Seth was 5. A tree kicked back off the saw and caught him across the chest. He was dead before the helicopter reached the hospital in Sudbury. I stepped in after that. Not legally, Seth's mother Irene was still alive then, but practically. I drove up to Timmins every other weekend, took the boy fishing on Porcupine Lake, helped him with math homework over the phone, paid for hockey equipment when Irene's disability checks couldn't stretch that far. When Irene passed from emphysema the year Seth turned 16, I became his legal guardian. Put him through the University of Guelph, got him an internship at my company, watched him grow into what I thought was a sharp, capable young man. Seth was 29 now. He had left my company 2 years earlier to start his own venture, a telehealth platform connecting rural patients with specialists. I had been proud of the idea, proud enough to invest $75,000 of my own money. When he told me he wanted to build something bigger together after my sale closed, I said yes without hesitation. The plan was a new company, a health data analytics firm. I would fund it, put in $12 million. Seth would run the day-to-day operations. 50-50 partnership. My way of setting him up the way Peter would have wanted. He had brought his girlfriend Danielle to the cottage. They had been together about 7 months. I had met her once before, briefly, at a dinner in Toronto, and we had done a handful of video calls. She worked in compliance at a bank downtown, or so Seth had told me. She was maybe 27, with short brown hair and a quiet intensity about her, the kind of person who listened more than she spoke and seemed to be cataloging everything. "What did you just say?" I kept my voice low. Through the cottage windows behind us, I could see Seth in the kitchen with my sister Lorraine and her husband Hugh. They were putting together a cheese board, laughing about something Hugh had said. The scene looked warm, safe, like every Thanksgiving I could remember. "The operating agreement Seth drafted," Danielle said. She was not looking at me. She was looking at the water, her hands shoved into the pockets of her jacket. The death benefit provision was originally standard. If one partner dies, the other stake transfers to designated heirs. But the version he printed for you to sign tomorrow has been altered. If you die within 18 months of incorporation, his 50% automatically converts to full ownership. Your heirs get nothing from the company. Just whatever cash is in your personal accounts. How do you know what's in the agreement? Because I have been going through his files. His laptop, his desk, his cloud storage. She finally looked at me, and there was something in her eyes that went beyond concern. My name is not Danielle Fournier. It is Danielle Tremblay. I am a forensic accountant. I was hired 6 months ago by a private investigation firm retained by one of Seth's former investors. A man in Ottawa who lost $200,000 in Seth's telehealth venture. The company never actually developed the platform. The money went to Seth's personal accounts, to lease payments on a car he didn't need, to a condo deposit in King West. My chest tightened. That telehealth company. I had seen the pitch deck. I had invested in it myself. Are you telling me the telehealth platform was a fraud? I am telling you it is a pattern. Before the telehealth company, there was a cannabis supply chain startup. Before that, a meal kit delivery service targeting Northern Ontario. 3 ventures, 3 different groups of investors, and every time the same playbook. Promising projections, a charismatic founder, and then the money disappears into operating costs that cannot be verified. Bankruptcy. Clean slate. Next project. I leaned against the cedar railing of the bluff lookout. The ferry was disappearing around the point, its lights winking against the darkening sky. Below us, the waves broke against the rocks in a steady, indifferent rhythm. So you went undercover? As his girlfriend. It started as surveillance. Getting close enough to document his financial activity. But once I was inside, she paused, picking her words carefully. I found things I was not looking for. Browser history. Searches about accidental drownings in cottage country. How long it takes for a body to be found in deep freshwater. Hypothermia timelines. Questions on forums about propane systems in older buildings and whether carbon monoxide detectors can be disabled without leaving evidence. He bookmarked an article about a man in Parry Sound who drowned after falling off a dock and how the coroner ruled it accidental because there were no witnesses. The waves kept breaking. A gull screamed somewhere overhead. The smell of cedar and cold water filled my lungs and suddenly felt hostile, like the landscape itself was complicit. You think he is planning to kill me? I think he has been researching how to make your death look like an accident. Whether he would follow through, I do not know. But the contract is designed so that he benefits enormously if you die soon after signing. And this cottage, she looked around, taking in the isolation, the cliffs, the deep water below us, the nearest neighbor half a kilometer through dense bush. This is the kind of place where accidents happen and nobody finds out for days. I had known this woman for 4 hours. She had arrived with Seth that afternoon, carrying a backpack and a bottle of wine, shaking my hand with a polite smile. I had no proof that anything she was saying was true. But something in my gut, the same instinct that had helped me navigate 20 years of contract negotiations and spot fraudulent data in clinical software trials, told me to listen. Helen used to say I was terrible at reading people but brilliant at reading situations. This situation was screaming at me. Why tell me? Why not go to the police? Because the evidence I have is civil, not criminal. My client, the Ottawa investor, hired the firm for a civil fraud case. I reported my concerns to the OPP detachment in Wyerton 2 weeks ago, but they told me suspicious browser history and a modified contract are not enough for criminal charges. They need evidence of an actual attempt. Intent in action, not just intent on paper. So what do you want me to do? Do not sign tomorrow. Tell him your lawyer needs another review. That delays things. And then we wait. If he's just a grifter who got greedy, he will recalculate, find another angle, maybe walk away. But if he is something worse, she trailed off, and the silence was worse than any ending she could have given that sentence. We started walking back toward the cottage. The trail wound through white birch trees, their bark peeling and pale in the fading light. Somewhere in the bush, a porcupine rustled through dead leaves. The air had turned cold the way it does in October in the Bruce Peninsula, a sharp reminder that winter was not far off. There is something you should know, I said. About 45 minutes before you pulled me aside, Seth offered to make me a drink. Said he had brought a bottle of single malt from a distillery in Prince Edward County. Wanted me to try it before dinner. Said it was a gift, a way of saying thank you for everything. I told him I would have some later, after we ate. Danielle stopped walking. Where is the bottle? Kitchen counter. Next to the spice rack. Dark bottle, handwritten label. Do not touch it. Do not let anyone else touch it. And do not drink anything Seth prepares for you tonight. Not water, not coffee, not beer. Nothing. We walked the rest of the way in silence. My mind was doing what it always did when confronted with a problem. Sorting variables, running scenarios, looking for the flaw in the logic. But this was not a software bug. This was my nephew. My brother's son. The boy I had held at Peter's funeral while he cried so hard he could not breathe. The cottage was warm and bright when we came in through the back door. Lorraine had set the table with Helen's old Thanksgiving dishes, the ones with the autumn leaf pattern around the rim. I had forgotten I had left those here. Seeing them hit me somewhere unexpected, a small grief folded inside the larger one. Seth was at the stove, stirring something in a large pot. Butternut squash soup. He looked up with a grin that was so much like Peter's it made my throat close. There you two are. Thought you got lost on the trail. Danielle, did my uncle bore you with his lecture about the Niagara Escarpment? He gives it to everyone. Danielle laughed, and it sounded perfectly natural. He showed me the lookout. The view is incredible. Best spot on the whole peninsula, Seth agreed. Uncle Mal, I poured you some of that scotch. Left it on the side table in the den. Should still be the right temperature. Thanks, but I think I will wait until after dinner. Do not want to spoil my appetite for whatever you are making. That smells incredible. Something moved behind his eyes. Just a flicker. Surprise, maybe. Or frustration. Then the warmth was back, easy and practiced. Sure thing. More for me, I guess. Dinner was the hardest performance of my life. I had to sit at that table, in my dead wife's chair because Seth had taken my usual spot and I did not want to make a scene, and laugh and eat and pretend that everything was fine. Hugh told stories about his job managing a car dealership in Burlington that were not as funny as he thought they were. Lorraine talked about her volunteer work at the library and how they were starting a podcast, which she described in painstaking detail that nobody had asked for. Seth was attentive, almost excessively so. He refilled my water glass twice without being asked. He insisted I take seconds of the soup. He asked about my retirement plans, my health, whether I had been sleeping well since the stress of the sale. Every gesture of care now looked like reconnaissance. Every question felt like it was gathering data. After dinner, Lorraine and Hugh went upstairs to their room. Long drive from Burlington, Hugh said, yawning for emphasis. They always turned in early. Seth suggested we sit on the screened porch and watch the stars the way we used to do when he was a teenager and I would drive him up here on winter weekends, the two of us wrapped in sleeping bags on the old wicker furniture, Helen inside reading with a cup of chamomile tea. Just like the old days, he said. Remember when I was 12 and I tried to convince you that the Big Dipper was actually called the Big Spatula because spatulas are more useful than dippers? I remembered all of it. Teaching him to cast a fly rod in the shallow water off the point. Building that crooked bookshelf in the garage that somehow still stood in the corner of the guest room. Driving him to Guelph for his first year, helping him haul boxes up 3 flights of stairs, buying him a mini fridge from the Canadian Tire on the way because his roommate had forgotten to bring one. Sitting beside him in the hospital in Timmins while Irene took her last breaths, his hand gripping mine so tightly I thought my fingers would break. I remember, I said. And my voice must have sounded strange, because he looked at me with something that might have been concern. You okay, Uncle Mal? Just thinking about your dad. Being up here always does that. Seth poked at the fire he had started in the outdoor fireplace. The flames threw shadows across his face that made him look older than 29. I know I have not always been upfront with you about business stuff, he said after a while. Some things did not go the way I told you they did. The telehealth company. Some of the numbers were not as strong as I presented. My pulse quickened. What do you mean? Just that I made some bad calls. Lost money. Got in over my head. But this time is going to be different. This partnership, it is real. The analytics market is exploding. We are going to build something important together. Seth, if there is something you need to tell me. I am just saying thank you. He looked up from the fire, and in the shifting light his expression was unreadable. You have been more of a father to me than an uncle ever had to be. I will not let you down this time. Danielle stood up from the Adirondack chair where she had been sitting quietly. I am going to grab my sweater from inside. It is getting cold out here. After she left, Seth leaned forward, lowering his voice. Can I ask you something about Danielle? Sure. Do you think she seems genuine to you? The question caught me sideways. What do you mean? I do not know. Sometimes I catch her looking at me like she is studying me. And she asks a lot of questions about money, about the business, about you. She says she works in compliance at TD, but I called her office once to surprise her with lunch, and the reception desk said there was no Danielle Fournier in their compliance department. He was watching me carefully. I could feel the weight of the moment, two people each trying to figure out who the other one trusted. What did she say when you asked about it? Said I must have called the wrong branch. But I checked. There is only one compliance office in downtown Toronto. He rubbed his hands together over the fire. I am thinking about ending things after this weekend. Something is off. So he was suspicious of her. And she was suspicious of him. And I was standing in the middle of it, 61 years old, exhausted from grief and the long erosion of trust that comes with losing too many people, trying to figure out which of these two young people was telling the truth and which one was performing. Danielle came back with a flannel shirt pulled over her shoulders. Seth immediately shifted gears, suggesting we toast marshmallows, joking about the time he set his eyebrow on fire trying to make s'mores when he was 14. He was smooth. Easy. If I had not heard what I heard an hour ago, I would not have suspected a thing. We called it a night around 11. Seth and Danielle took the guest room on the main floor. Lorraine and Hugh were upstairs. I went to my room at the back of the cottage, the room Helen and I had shared for 19 years. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening. Every sound the cottage made, every groan of old wood settling, every gust of wind rattling the windows, sent a spike of adrenaline through my chest. Was that the propane? Was that footsteps? The carbon monoxide detector in the hallway had fresh batteries. I had checked them when I opened the cottage in May. But a detector does not help if someone simply removes it. At 1:45 in the morning, my phone lit up. A text from Danielle. Do not drink from the water pitcher on your nightstand. I tested a sample from the one in the kitchen earlier. Midazolam. A benzodiazepine sedative. Strong concentration. Dangerous for someone your age. I am sending lab confirmation in the morning. I looked at the pitcher on my nightstand. I had filled it from the kitchen tap before dinner. Someone had added something to it afterward. When I was on the porch with Seth. Or when Danielle had gone inside to get her sweater. Had she added it herself, then texted me to build credibility? I did not know. The uncertainty was its own kind of poison. I got up, carried the pitcher to the bathroom, and poured it down the drain. Then I ran the tap for 2 full minutes. Then I wedged the desk chair under my door handle, sat down in the rocking chair by the window where Helen used to read, and watched the moon move across the bay until morning. Dawn came in gray and cold. October on Georgian Bay, the water the color of pewter, the sky threatening rain that would not come until afternoon. I had not slept. My eyes burned. My back ached from the rocking chair. But my mind was clear, the way it gets when you have been awake so long that exhaustion wraps around and becomes a strange kind of focus. I heard the coffee maker start. Low voices in the kitchen. When I finally came out, Seth was at the counter, flipping pancakes. Bacon in the cast iron. My favorites. There he is, Seth said brightly. Rough night? You look like you did not sleep. Tossed and turned. Happens when I am up here sometimes. Too quiet. Well, fuel up. Big day. We sign the papers, officially partners, and then maybe we drive down to Owen Sound for lunch. Celebrate properly. Actually, I said carefully, I want to push the signing back a couple of days. Want my lawyer to do one more pass on the agreement. The kitchen went very still. Even Hugh, who had been pouring orange juice and humming to himself, stopped mid-pour. Your lawyer, Seth said. His smile did not move, but something behind it hardened. Just due diligence. You understand. We have been through that agreement 4 times. You said it was fine. And I am sure it is. But 12 million is a lot of money, Seth. Helen always said I should have a professional review anything over 6 figures. Consider it me honoring her memory. If you do not trust me, just say it. It is not about trust. It is about doing things right. Seth set down the spatula with more force than necessary. The pancake he had been flipping landed half off the griddle. He did not fix it. Danielle appeared in the doorway, hair damp from a shower. She looked between us, reading the room instantly. Lorraine stepped in with the voice she had been using to smooth over family friction since we were children. Malcolm is just being careful, Seth. That is how he built a $30 million company. You should be glad your partner is thorough. But the damage was done. Breakfast passed in strained conversation about the weather, whether the hiking trails would be muddy, if the roof needed new shingles before winter. The kind of talk that fills space without saying anything. After we ate, Seth said he needed to make some calls and shut himself in the guest room. I heard his voice through the door, low and urgent, but could not make out words. Danielle caught my eye and tilted her head toward the deck. Outside, she spoke in a whisper. The water. I had a field test kit in my bag. I tested the pitcher in the kitchen before dinner and the one I found outside your room this morning. The kitchen pitcher was clean. The one on your nightstand tested positive for a benzodiazepine. Midazolam. Prescription sedative. At that concentration, for a man your age and weight, it would cause severe drowsiness, impaired coordination, memory blackout. Maybe respiratory depression. Someone drugged it. Someone walked into your room between when you filled it and when you went to bed. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out her phone. And I found something else. She showed me screenshots. His phone. He was charging it in the living room overnight. He has been texting someone named Mitch. They are planning to come up here Monday night, after Lorraine and Hugh leave. Just you and Seth. The texts mention the dock, the cliffs, the deep water off the point. They are using careful language, but the meaning is clear. I read the messages. They were written in a way that could be dismissed as innocent if you wanted them to be. Talk about fixing the dock. Assessing the cliff face. Checking the depth off the point for a possible swimming platform. But threaded through the practical language were phrases that turned my stomach. Make sure he's relaxed. Easier after dark. Current pulls everything toward the channel. Nobody checks that water until spring. Mitch is a friend from his Guelph days, Danielle said. He was involved in the cannabis startup. He has a criminal record. Assault and uttering threats, for years ago, charges plea bargained down to a peace bond. He is the muscle. Seth is the plan. A door opened inside. We stopped talking. Seth came out onto the deck, his expression carefully neutral. Danielle, can I talk to you? Just us. She glanced at me, then nodded. They walked down the slope toward the water, out of earshot. Seth was gesturing, his body language tight and contained. Danielle shook her head several times. At one point she put her hands up, palms out, the universal gesture of I am not the enemy. Seth turned away from her, hands on his hips, looking out at the bay. Lorraine came out and stood beside me. Is everything all right? Seth seems wound up. Just stress. The deal, the relationship. He will be fine. He is a good kid, Malcolm. I know he has rough edges, but he loves you. You know that, right? Yeah, I said. I know. But I did not know. Not anymore. And standing there on that deck, looking out at the bay where Helen and I had kayaked every summer for almost 2 decades, I felt a grief that was different from losing her, different from losing Peter. This was the grief of discovering that love can be weaponized. That someone can hold your hand and plan your death with the same fingers. Seth and Danielle came back looking strained. Seth announced they were going to drive into Wyerton for groceries, maybe stop at the brewery. They would be back by late afternoon. After their car disappeared down the gravel road, I went inside and called the OPP detachment in Wyerton. Asked to speak to someone about a potential fraud case that might involve something more serious. They transferred me to a detective named Sergeant Fiona Beaulieu, who listened without interrupting while I laid out everything Danielle had told me, everything I had observed, the doctored water, the text messages, the altered contract. When I finished, there was a pause. Mr. Driscoll, she said, I should tell you that I am already aware of this situation. Danielle Tremblay contacted us 2 weeks ago. We have verified her credentials. She is legitimate. The private investigation firm she works for, Atchison Partners in Toronto, is well established. They specialize in financial fraud. So it is real. The fraud component appears to be solid. Multiple victims, a clear pattern. But the question of whether your nephew is planning physical harm, that is what we have been trying to determine. The text messages Danielle forwarded to us are concerning but ambiguous. We need something more concrete. What are you suggesting? I am suggesting that with your cooperation, we set up a controlled situation. You stay at the cottage. If Seth returns with this Mitch individual, you go along with whatever they propose. We will have officers positioned nearby. If they make an overt threat or attempt anything, we intervene. It is the only way to establish criminal intent beyond the civil fraud. You want me to be bait. I want you to help us protect you and build a case that will actually hold up. If we move too early, if we arrest him on what we have now, a good lawyer gets him off. Fraud charges stick, maybe. But the attempted murder, which is what those text messages are pointing toward, that requires them to take a step past planning and into action. I thought about it. I thought about Seth at 5 years old, standing beside me at Peter's casket, asking me why his daddy was sleeping in a box. Seth at 17, so nervous before his first job interview that he threw up in my car, and I told him it was fine, that everyone gets nervous, that I was proud of him no matter what happened. Seth at 25, showing me the business plan for the meal kit company with such enthusiasm that I did not ask the hard questions I should have asked. Seth at 29, researching how long a body takes to surface in freshwater. Okay, I said. Let us do it. The rest of the day unfolded in a strange, suspended way. Lorraine and Hugh decided to leave early. Hugh had a staff meeting Tuesday morning, and the drive to Burlington was 4 hours if the 401 was clear. They left around 2, Lorraine hugging me at the car, telling me to take care of myself, to eat properly, to call her during the week. I stood in the driveway and watched their car until it disappeared around the bend in the road. Then I was alone. Danielle returned around 4. Without Seth. She said he was meeting a friend in Owen Sound, would be back later. We both knew who the friend was. Sergeant Beaulieu arrived an hour after that, in plain clothes, driving a civilian pickup truck. With her was Constable Park, a young officer who looked like he should still be in college but moved with the kind of quiet competence that told me he had done this before. They went over the plan. I would stay in the cottage, act normal. If Seth came back with someone, I would follow their lead. The officers would be positioned in the tree line between the cottage and the cliff, equipped with night vision and recording equipment. What if they have weapons? I asked. We will be armed, Beaulieu said. And we have a tactical unit from Barrie on standby. They can be here in 30 minutes by helicopter. But based on those texts, these two are planning something that looks like an accident. Weapons leave evidence they do not want. Danielle was pacing by the window, her arms crossed. I should have pushed harder 2 weeks ago. I had enough for you to bring him in on the fraud. You had enough for charges that might not stick, Beaulieu said. You did the right thing. You got us here before anything happened. That matters. Night came. The officers went into the woods. Danielle stayed in the cottage with me. We sat in the den, pretending to watch a documentary about the group of 7 on my laptop, both of us listening to every sound outside. The wind had picked up. Rain that had threatened all day was finally arriving, pattering against the windows in irregular bursts. I thought about Helen. About the night before her diagnosis, when we had sat in this exact room, drinking tea, talking about what we would do when I finally sold the company. She wanted to go to the Maritimes. Drive a Cabot Trail. Eat lobster in some tiny harbor town where nobody knew our names. Stay in bed and breakfasts and read novels and not check email for an entire month. We never got to do any of it. Around 9:15, headlights appeared on the cottage road. 2 sets. Seth's sedan. And behind it, a dark pickup truck. That is Mitch, Danielle said. She had gone pale. Seth came in first, shaking rain off his jacket. He was smiling, but it was a different smile than the one I knew. Tighter. More deliberate. Uncle Mel, great news. I ran into my buddy Mitch in Owen Sound. Remember I told you about him? He does landscaping and stonework. He said he would take a look at that retaining wall by the cliff. The one that has been crumbling. We can go check it out now while the rain has let up a bit. Mitch came in behind him. Tall, heavy-set, with a shaved head and work boots that left mud on Helen's rug. He shook my hand. Firm grip, eye contact held a beat too long. Nice place you have got here, Mitch said. Seth tells me the cliffside needs some shoring up. Mind if we take a walk down there? I have got a flashlight. Can give you a quick assessment tonight, then come back tomorrow with proper equipment. This was it. The moment Beaulieu had described. The pivot from planning to action. Sure, I said. Let me grab my rain jacket. Danielle was standing by the kitchen counter. She caught my eye. The look she gave me was not one I could easily describe. Fear, certainly. But also something steadier. Resolution, maybe. Trust. You guys go ahead, Seth said to Danielle. We will be back in 20 minutes. The 3 of us walked out into the drizzle. The path to the cliff edge was slick with wet leaves, and Mitch led the way, his flashlight cutting a white beam through the darkness. Seth walked beside me, one hand on my elbow in a gesture that could have been solicitous or controlling. We reached the retaining wall. It was a low stone barrier I had built with Peter 35 years ago, back when we first bought the property together, before he moved north for the logging work that would kill him. The wall had been crumbling for years. Beyond it, the cliff dropped 15 meters to the rocks and the black water of the bay. So here is the thing, Seth said. His voice had changed. The warmth was gone, replaced by something flat and practical. I know you are stalling on the agreement. I know you talked to someone. And I know Danielle is not who she says she is. My stomach dropped. What are you talking about? She called herself Danielle Fournier when I introduced her to you. But her real name is Danielle Tremblay. She works for a firm called Atchison Partners. They investigate financial fraud. One of my former investors hired them. He stepped closer. I have known for 2 weeks. I was waiting to see what she would do. Turns out, she went to you. Seth, just listen. No, you listen. Mitch moved to stand behind me, blocking the path back to the cottage. Seth's voice stayed calm, almost conversational, and that was the most frightening part. We can still make this work. You signed the agreement tonight. I have the papers in the car. Danielle keeps quiet about the fraud investigation. She has no standing anyway. She is a private investigator, not a cop. Everybody moves on. The company makes money. You make money. We all win. And if I say no? Then we have a problem. Seth looked past me, at the cliff edge, at the darkness beyond the retaining wall. It is raining. The stones are slippery. You are 61 with high blood pressure. These things happen up here all the time. Cottage accidents. Tragic, but not suspicious. I do not have high blood pressure. You will. After the medication in your system shows up on the toxicology report. Same stuff that was in your water pitcher. We put a dose in the scotch, too. You may not have had any, but Mitch brought a bottle of the same medication. A few milliliters in a glass of water, you drink it in front of us, and in 30 minutes you were disoriented, uncoordinated, and standing too close to a cliff edge in the dark. Mitch set down the bag he had been carrying. Not a tool bag. It unzipped to reveal a thermos, a glass, and a small brown bottle. Everything they needed. You would do this, I said. To me. After everything. Seth's jaw tightened. Do not make this about sentiment. You were never going to give me what I deserve. 12 million sounds generous until you realize you are keeping 27 for yourself. That is not a partnership. That is charity. And I am done being your charity case. Your father would be ashamed of you. My father is dead. He has been dead for 24 years. He does not get a vote. Up. Nobody move. Hands where we can see them. The tree line erupted in light. Flashlights, headlamps, the beams of tactical equipment I could not identify. Sergeant Beaulieu's voice came from somewhere to my left, amplified and steady. Mitch swore and bolted toward the trail, but he made it exactly 4 steps before 2 officers materialized from the darkness and brought him down hard on the wet ground. Seth stood frozen, his mouth open, his hands half raised, looking for all the world like the confused, frightened boy I remembered from Peter's funeral. Seth Driscoll, Mitchell Cowan, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, extortion, and fraud. You have the right to retain and instruct counsel without delay. I sat down on Peter's stone wall, the wall we had built together in a single weekend, mixing mortar and arguing about the right height, and I let the rain fall on my face and I did not move. Seth was yelling. Saying it was a bluff, they were just trying to scare me, they never would have gone through with it. Classic. The reflex of every person caught in the act. Mitch said nothing. He lay face down in the mud with his wrists being zip-tied, and he said absolutely nothing. Danielle came running down from the cottage. She stopped when she saw Seth in handcuffs, his face twisted in a way I had never seen before. She looked at me. I am sorry, she said. I know he was family. Was, I said. And the past tense felt like the cliff edge I had been standing next to. A drop you could not come back from. The investigation took 4 months. They found everything. The previous frauds, documented in detail. The fake investor decks, the shell companies, the personal spending. Seth's laptop contained a folder, poorly encrypted, with research on accidental drownings, drug interactions, and the response times of emergency services in Bruce County. He had calculated that it would take the Coast Guard 45 minutes to reach our section of the shoreline by boat, and that in October water temperatures, a body would show signs consistent with hypothermia within 20 minutes. He had planned this with precision. Not passion. Precision. Mitch's role was secondary. He had been promised 15% of whatever Seth gained, which would have been the full 12 million plus whatever the company was worth down the line. There was no evidence Mitch had been involved in the earlier frauds. He was a mercenary, not a mastermind. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Seth's lawyer argued entrapment, claiming Danielle's undercover relationship constituted a violation of his rights. The judge disagreed. Danielle's work had been conducted as a private investigator, not as a state agent, and her evidence had been independently verified before the OPP became involved. The moment Seth and Mitch made direct threats and physically blocked my exit from the cliff path, It crossed from planning into attempt. Seth took a plea deal. 14 years for fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, and extortion. Mitch got 9. Both would be eligible for parole after a third of their sentences, but both would carry criminal records for the rest of their lives. I sold the concept for the analytics company to a colleague in Vancouver, a woman I had worked with for 15 years and trusted as much as I trusted anyone. Put most of the money into a trust for Lorraine's kids and a few cousins I had stayed close to over the years. The rest went into a foundation for children who had lost parents to workplace accidents, specifically in forestry and construction. The kind of foundation Peter would have wanted. The kind I should have built years ago instead of just writing checks and hoping that money could substitute for the things Seth had actually needed, which was someone paying closer enough attention to notice when he started to break. Dr. Samira Osei, a psychologist Helen and I had seen together during the worst of her illness, called me when she read about the trial in the Toronto Star. We met for coffee in Collingwood, and she said something I have thought about every day since. She said grief makes us generous in ways that are not always wise. That I had tried to fill the hole Peter's death left in Seth's life with opportunities and money, and that those things, without structure, without accountability, without honest conversation about failure and pain, can become a kind of fuel for exactly the wrong impulses. She was right. I had loved Seth in the way that was easiest for me, with resources and access and the belief that providing enough runway would allow him to take off. I had never asked him the hard questions. Never pushed back when his stories did not add up. Never treated him like a man who needed to earn trust instead of a boy who deserved it by default. Danielle Tremblay, her real name, went back to Atchison Partners. We stayed in touch. She had done her job with integrity and at considerable personal risk, not just the physical danger of that night on the cliff, but the moral complexity of maintaining a fabricated relationship for months while building a case against someone she was sleeping next to every night. I asked her once how she handled it. She said, "You compartmentalize, and then you go to therapy." In that order. A year after the trial, I drove back up to the cottage for the first time. It was late September, that narrow window when the leaves are at their peak and the light has a quality that makes everything look like a painting you could not afford. I walked down to the retaining wall Peter and I had built. Someone, maybe me, should probably repair it. But I did not want to. It felt right to leave it the way it was, crumbling and honest. I stood at the cliff edge and listened. The wind in the birch trees. The waves on the rocks below. A pair of loons calling to each other from somewhere on the bay, that strange, wavering cry that sounds like it is asking a question it already knows the answer to. I thought about the signs I had missed. Seth's eagerness to become a partner. His curiosity about my health, my medications, my daily routine. The way he had specifically suggested this cottage, this weekend, this isolation. How he had offered to handle all the paperwork himself. How he had made sure Lorraine and Hugh would leave before Monday. Every kindness had been a calculation. Every question had been a reconnaissance. I thought about Peter. About whether he would have seen what I could not. Peter had been the instinctive one, the one who trusted his gut, who could walk onto a job site and know within 5 minutes whether the foreman was cutting corners. He would have looked at Seth's pitch deck and asked the question I never asked, where's the actual product? But Peter was dead, and I had been trying to be both uncle and father and had ended up being neither, just a man with money and guilt and a blind spot the size of his own grief. I thought about Helen. What she would have said if she had been alive when Seth proposed the partnership. She would have asked to see the financials. She would have called Seth's references. She would have sat across from him at this very table and said, with the directness that had terrified my employees and delighted my friends, "Seth, look me in the eye and tell me this is real." "You were right," I said to the empty air, to the memory of her that lived in every room of this cottage, in every dish and blanket and bookshelf. "You always said I led with my wallet instead of my eyes. You always said trust is something people build, not something you hand out like Halloween candy." The wind picked up, pushing clouds across the sun. The light on the water shifted from gold to silver and back again. Somewhere in the woods behind me, a woodpecker started up, rapid and rhythmic, working at a dead tree with the kind of persistence that does not care whether anyone is watching. I pulled out my phone and called Lorraine. Hey. It is me. Listen, I know this is short notice, but would you and Hugh and the kids want to come up to the cottage next weekend? I am thinking it is time to have a Thanksgiving that is actually about being thankful. She said yes. She said she would bring Hugh's famous turkey. She said the kids had been asking about the cottage all summer. Because that is what betrayal does. It does not just take the present from you. It tries to reach backward and poison every memory, make you second-guess every moment of warmth, every instance of trust. It wants you to believe that love was always a lie, that kindness was always a setup, that the people you held closest were always calculating the angle. But I would not let it. This cottage belonged to me and Helen first. Then to me and Peter. Then to me alone. Seth was one chapter, not the whole story. And there were other chapters waiting to be written, with Lorraine's grandkids doing cannonballs off the dock, with Hugh burning hot dogs on the barbecue and insisting he was a grill master, with long evenings on the porch watching the light move across Georgian Bay like it was rehearsing for something beautiful. Before I left, I stopped at the OPP detachment in Wyerton. Bullew was at her desk. Mr. Driscoll. Good to see you. How are you doing? Better. I wanted to say thank you. To you and Constable Park. You put yourselves between me and something I could not face alone. She shook my hand. You faced it. That was the hard part. Accepting the truth about someone you loved. Most people cannot do that until it is too late. 2 years after the trial, Danielle called me. She had left Atchison Partners and joined the OPP's Financial Crimes Unit. She had also written a report on elder financial exploitation that was being used in training programs for police services across Ontario. I wanted you to know, she said. Something good came from what happened to you. We have identified and stopped 4 similar schemes in the past year because of the patterns we documented in Seth's case. That is something, I said. And Malcolm. For what it is worth. Seth reached out to me through his lawyer. He wanted to apologize. To you? To you. Through me. He said he was sorry. That the money had seemed so easy, and that he had convinced himself you would not really miss it, that 12 million out of 27 was not really stealing from family. He said it spiraled. That by the time he realized what he was actually planning, what he had actually become, he felt like he could not stop. Like the momentum of his own lies was carrying him forward and Mitch was watching, expecting him to follow through. He said none of that was an excuse. No. It is not. But I thought you should know. I thought about that for a long time after we hung up. Did an apology change anything? Did knowing that Seth recognized the enormity of what he had done make it hurt less? Not really. But it made him human again, and that was something. Because the alternative, believing he was a monster, a pure predator wearing my brother's face, was worse than the betrayal itself. People are complicated. Seth was not born planning to kill his uncle. He had been a boy who lost his father, who was raised with money instead of presents, who learned to perform gratitude instead of feeling it, and who somewhere along the way crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. Both things were true. The boy I loved and the man who would have watched me fall off a cliff. Both real. Both Seth. The cottage became mine again. Fully mine. I spent summers there, brought friends from Collingwood and Toronto, hosted Lorraine's family for every holiday. I started dating a woman I met at a grief support group in Barrie, a retired veterinarian named Pauline whose husband had died of a stroke 3 years earlier. She understood loss the way only someone who has lived through it can, not as something to get over but as something to carry, like a stone in your pocket that you learn to walk with. On quiet nights, I still walked down to the cliff and stood at Peter's wall and thought about that October evening. The rain on my face. The sound of Seth's voice going flat and businesslike as he explained how he would kill me. The way the flashlights had erupted from the tree line like a kind of violent sunrise. How close it had come. How easily it could have gone the other way, if Danielle had not risked her cover, if Beaulieu had not taken her seriously, if I had drunk the scotch. But I also thought about the other things. Lorraine driving 4 hours in traffic to spend a weekend eating burned hot dogs on my deck. Danielle calling me every few months just to check in, no agenda, no case file, just the quiet persistence of someone who chose to care. Polly laughing at my terrible cooking and teaching me how to make a proper risotto, standing behind me at the stove with her hands over mine on the wooden spoon. Life is full of betrayals. People choose money over loyalty, self-interest over love, the easy path over the right one. But life is also full of people who show up. Who whisper warnings they did not have to give. Who stand in the rain between you and the edge. Who drive the 401 on a Friday afternoon just to sit beside you on a dock and say nothing important. I learned to hold both truths. To be cautious but not closed. To trust but verify. To love with open eyes instead of a blind heart. Seth will be eligible for parole in a few years. I do not know what I will do if he reaches out. Lorraine thinks I should consider hearing him out, eventually. Dr. Osei says to wait and see how I feel when the time comes. Danielle says it is entirely my decision and no one would fault me either way. Pauline says she will be beside me whatever I choose, which is the only answer that matters. For now, I am grateful. For the cottage. For the bay. For the sound of loons in the morning and the way the light comes through the birch trees in September like it is trying to tell you something you already know. For the people who stayed. For the fact that I am here at all, standing at this wall my brother and I built with our own hands, breathing cold air that smells like pine and rain and the leftover smoke from last night's fire, alive and awake and finally understanding what Helen tried to teach me all along, that love without discernment is just generosity waiting to be exploited. And that the bravest thing you can do is keep loving anyway, with your eyes wide open and your hand on the railing and your back to nobody you have not chosen to trust. The water catches the morning light and scatters it into 1,000 small fires. The coffee is getting cold on the railing beside me. And out on the bay, a loon calls once, clear and long, not sad, not joyful, just present, just here, and that is enough.